The cameras were rolling, the lights glaring, and the panel had barely settled into its rhythm when it happened. Jasmine Crockett was midway through her point, weaving a sharp argument about integrity in public life, when Tucker Carlson suddenly cut in, his voice polished and booming, sliced through hers with the confidence of someone accustomed to owning the stage. It wasn't just an interruption, it was an attempt to seize the narrative, to remind everyone watching who he thought the real authority in the room was. For a moment, the studio air tightened. A ripple of unease moved across the faces of the other panelists. Jasmine stopped, her eyes fixed on him, her sentence left dangling in the air. Tucker leaned back in his chair with that signature half-smile, part amusement, part condescension, as if daring her to challenge him on his turf. The room seemed to pause with him. Producers behind the glass froze. Even the audience watching live leaned closer to their screens. Jasmine's silence wasn't weakness, it was calculation. In that breathless instant, viewers could sense it. The stage had transformed from a polite discussion into a battlefield. Tucker's interruption wasn't new. He'd built a career on them. But this time, it felt different. There was an electricity in the silence that followed, a tension that suggested the balance of power might be about to shift. Jasmine's eyes didn't waver. She didn't flinch, didn't fold, didn't rush to reclaim her words. Instead, she let the quiet stretch the nation, in living rooms and on phones across America, held its breath. People knew what usually came next in moments like these. The guest stumbles, the interruption works. Tucker walks away with another clean victory. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't like the others. She had come prepared not only to speak, but to be heard. Her pause became its own weapon, her silence a mirror reflecting Tucker's arrogance back at him. The panelists exchanged glances, sensing that something unpredictable was about to unfold. The interruption had been his move. What she would do next that would decide everything, and then came those 10 seconds. 10 seconds that no one in the room or across the nation would forget. 10 seconds that would leave the panel in stunned silence. But those 10 seconds, they would change the entire conversation. Asterisk, to understand the weight of that moment, you have to rewind. This wasn't just another panel, another night of talking heads sparring for sound bites. This was prime time, a stage where reputations were either built into legend or broken into ridicule. Millions of eyes were fixed on the broadcast, and behind every screen was a viewer who believed the future of the country could be tilted by what unfolded here. For years, Tucker Carlson had commanded this terrain. He wasn't just another television host, he was a heavyweight voice who treated political discourse like a gladiator match. His interruptions, his smirks, his surgical timing, they weren't accidents. They were weapons honed through countless confrontations. Guests often arrived with facts and fire, but under his glare and his rhythm, they stumbled. He thrived on imbalance. He wielded control not just with words but with presence, turning debates into performances. Where he always claimed the last laugh, that was the reputation he carried into this night. To his loyal audience, he was untouchable, the arbiter who could expose weakness in anyone who dared to step onto his platform. To his critics, he was a manipulator, a man who mistook loudness for truth. But either way, he was a force. Facing him meant stepping into an arena where intimidation was baked into the walls. And yet, across from him sat Jasmine Crockett. She was not the typical guest who came cautiously, hoping to squeeze a point in between his interruptions. Jasmine had carved her path differently, bold, unfiltered, and unapologetic. She had built her name by refusing to bow to power. Her speeches carried the rawness of someone who had fought her way up, who had lived the contradictions of America firsthand, and who was unafraid to say the quiet part out loud. To her supporters, she was a rising voice for dignity, for truth unpolished but undeniable. This clash wasn't random. It was inevitable. Tucker represented the established order of control, the polished narrative machine. Represented the insurgent defiance of a new generation unwilling to be silenced. And on this stage, the stakes could not have been higher. It wasn't just about a television debate. It was about who owned the story of America. Would it be Tucker, with his practiced dominance and calculated dismissals, or Jasmine, with her refusal to be diminished, her insistence that even the loudest voice cannot erase truth. Every viewer watching knew the rules of the game. If Jasmine faltered, if she let the interruption rattle her, it would be clipped, replayed, and weaponized. Headlines would declare that Tucker had once again proven untouchable. But if she held steady, if she managed to flip the script in those tense seconds, she could do what few had ever done: dismantle the aura of inevitability around him. The panel had started as a discussion, but by the time Tucker cut her off, it had become something else entirely. The air was no longer filled with words, but with the charge of conflict, the unspoken recognition that this was no longer about policy or debate points. It was about power. The cameras zoomed in, the lights bore down, and the weight of the moment pressed on everyone watching. This wasn't just another argument. It was the moment that would either cement Tucker's dominance or dismantle it. Asterisk for decades. Tucker Carlson has been more than just a television host. He has been a cultural force, a man whose face, voice, and cadence have become synonymous with the idea of the political showdown. His rise was steady, methodical, marked by a talent for translating complicated issues into sharp, consumable sound bites that struck either admiration or outrage depending on who you asked. He didn't simply occupy airtime, dominated it. To sit across from Tucker wasn't to have a conversation, it was to enter his coliseum. From his early days in media, Tucker mastered the art of control. He knew how to guide a discussion, not by listening, but by commanding. His interruptions were calculated, always timed to derail a point just as it gained momentum. His smirks, those fleeting moments of facial theater, communicated disdain without a word to his audience. They were a wink, a signal that he was always 2 steps ahead of his opponent. To his guests, they were daggers. Undermining their credibility in front of millions, it was this blend of charisma and condescension that made him a fixture in American households. Viewers who aligned with his worldview adored him because he wasn't afraid to belittle those who challenged their beliefs. Those who opposed him watched because, love him or hate him, he was impossible to ignore. Every raised eyebrow, every clipped interruption, every rehearsed laugh was part of the performance. Tucker didn't just report the news he staged. Over the years, controversies surrounded him like a storm, yet they seemed only to feed his aura. When critics accused him of distortion, his supporters praised him for telling it like it is. When journalists dissected his segments for inaccuracies, his fans dismissed it as proof of establishment bias. Tucker thrived in the fire. He wore outrage like armor, turning every critique into fuel for his narrative that he was the last honest man in a media landscape of frauds. On panel after panel, Tucker built his legend. Politicians, activists, academics, many entered his studio, armed with facts and determination. Many left looking smaller than when they had arrived. His interruptions weren't just conversational tactics, they were a strategy of dominance. The goal wasn't to prove someone wrong with evidence. It was to unsettle them, to make them stumble, to strip them of their composure. Once that happened, the argument was over, because Tucker's audience didn't crave reason. They craved the spectacle of victory, and Tucker gave it to them. Again and again, he cultivated an image of untouchability, no matter the controversy. No matter the backlash, he appeared to come out unscathed. To challenge him was to step into a trap where every word could be twisted, every hesitation amplified. Guests often walked away with the sinking realization that the ground beneath them had never been steady, controlled the terrain, he set the rules. And because of that, he almost always won. The smirk became his signature weapon. That slight curl of the lip, the almost imperceptible shake of the head, told viewers everything. This person isn't serious. This person is beneath me. He didn't have to say it outright. His expressions said it for him. Audiences picked up. On the queue and in their living rooms, millions would laugh along, convinced that Tucker had once again exposed a fraud. But this power wasn't just about television. It was about intimidation. To his critics, Tucker embodied the arrogance of media elites who believed they could decide what counted as truth. To his supporters, he was a warrior against political correctness. Someone willing to interrupt, to sneer, to steamroll in defense of their worldview. He built a following not through humility, but through dominance. And for years, dominance worked. His presence on this panel was no accident. It was another opportunity to demonstrate that the formula was still unbreakable. Interruption, ridicule. Victory, the cycle had played out countless times. Tucker had no reason to believe it would be different tonight, but what Tucker didn't realize was that Jasmine Crockett wasn't like the others. Long before Jasmine Crockett found herself under the glare of studio lights, she had been forged in a very different kind of spotlight, one that came not from cameras, but from the hard realities of life. Raised in a world where opportunities often felt rationed, Jasmine's story was not the carefully curated path of privilege. It was grit, persistence, and an unrelenting refusal to be silenced. Her upbringing taught her early that life was rarely fair and that voices like hers, sharp, unapologetic, rooted in the everyday struggles of ordinary people, were often the first to be dismissed. But instead of bending, she sharpened herself against that resistance, where others sought to blend in. Jasmine leaned into her difference, where others kept quiet for safety. She spoke up for survival. Every debate, every confrontation, every attempt to minimize her became another chance to prove that she could not be erased. When she first stepped into politics, the skepticism was immediate. Critics underestimated her, branding her as too direct, too fiery, too unwilling to play the game. But Jasmine didn't come to play. She came to represent. She understood the communities that felt invisible, the families who lived paycheck to paycheck, the students buried in loans, the immigrants carrying both hope and fear in their hearts. These weren't statistics to her. They were neighbors, friends, reflections of her own journey. What made Jasmine stand out wasn't just her background. It was her fearlessness. She had a way of turning dismissals into applause lines. Others tried to silence her with interruptions. She learned to sharpen her replies into daggers of truth. When powerful figures attempted to talk over her, she didn't retreat. She raised her volume, not in noise, but in clarity. She was quick-witted, never scrambling for words, always ready to pierce through arrogance with precision. Her history was littered with moments that proved her resilience. In courtrooms, she had held her ground against seasoned attorneys who thought they could bury her in procedure. On political stages, she had stared down rivals who believed experience alone could overshadow her conviction. Each time, she had come out not just surviving, but thriving, and the record showed it. Time after time, Jasmine Crockett refused to be underestimated. And that is why too many watching, Jasmine wasn't just another politician. She was their voice. She was the embodiment of every person who had been dismissed, interrupted, condescended to because of their identity, their gender, or their background. Her sharpness wasn't hostility, it was honesty. Her boldness wasn't arrogance, it was necessity. She carried the weight of people who had been waiting for someone who looked and sounded like them to not only take a seat at the table, but to dominate it. She was unbought, unafraid, and unpolished in the best way. Lobbyists couldn't script her, donors couldn't tame her, pundits couldn't predict her. And audiences loved her for it, because she didn't just argue policies, she argued lives. Real and lived, with the kind of urgency that only comes from authenticity. So when she entered the studio that night, she didn't come intimidated by the legend of Tucker Carlson. She knew his reputation. Of course, the interruptions, the smirks, the manufactured victories. But she also knew her own, and her history told her one thing with certainty. She had faced bigger battles than a TV host's smirk, and she had always come out standing. That night wasn't about Tucker. It wasn't even about her. It was about everyone who had ever been told to wait their turn, to lower their voice, to shrink in the presence of arrogance. Jasmine carried that with her as she adjusted the microphone as she sat beneath the hot studio lights. She carried the weight of people who were ready, finally, to see someone refuse to back down. The interruption, when it came, was predictable. She had anticipated it. She knew Tucker's rhythm, his timing, his reliance on disruption as a weapon. But she had something he didn't expect: preparation. She had sharpened her replies not just with facts but with fire. She had studied the mechanics of intimidation and decided that she would no longer participate in the script that gave power. Two bullies. So when Tucker leaned in with his smirk, when he cut her off mid-sentence, Jasmine didn't stumble. She didn't rush. She didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. She simply looked at him, calm and unbroken, as if to say, "You're not the first to try this. You won't be the last. You won't be the one who wins." And so, when the interruption came, she was ready. The moment unfolded like a slow-motion collision. Jasmine had just begun laying out her argument with calm precision when Tucker's voice sliced through hers, sharp and deliberate. "That's not serious?" he scoffed, waving a hand as though brushing her entire point off the table. His tone carried that well-practiced mix of dismissal and amusement, the kind he'd used countless times before to rattle opponents and remind them who controlled the room. A few panelists shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between the two. One raised his brows, silently questioning whether Jasmine would let the interruption derail her. Another leaned back, lips tightening, as if preparing to witness a train wreck. Behind the glass, producers whispered urgently, unsure whether to cut away or lean in closer. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't rush to reclaim her words. Instead, she straightened in her chair, her gaze locking onto Tucker with a calm so sharp it cut through the noise. The silence she created was louder than any protest could have been. For the first time, it was Tucker who seemed unsettled, filling the air with a smirk that tried to disguise the sudden flicker of unease. The tension was immediate, electric. Viewers at home leaned forward, sensing that this wasn't just a clash of ideas but of wills. Tucker leaned into his signature tactic, interrupting again, his words spilling faster this time, almost daring Jasmine to compete with his volume. He expected her to falter, to scramble for footing, the way so many before her had. Chose a different weapon, brevity. Her replies came in sharp bursts, clipped, deliberate, impossible to ignore. "Wasn't finished. Let me speak. You'll get your turn." Each phrase landed like a strike, punctuated by the fire in her eyes. She didn't raise her voice. She raised her presence. And in that duel of dominance, it was her restraint that commanded the room. The panel around them reacted like spectators at ringside. A murmur rose, chairs shifted, one panelist's jaw dropped slightly in disbelief. The camera caught everything. Tucker's smirk tightening, Jasmine's eyes narrowing, the widening gap between arrogance and composure. Tucker pressed harder, doubling down with a sarcastic laugh. "Please, enlighten us," he said, his words dripping with mockery. But that laugh, once a tool of control, now sounded defensive. Jasmine's stare didn't break. Her posture didn't bend. She was speaking less, but saying more. It became clear that this was no ordinary exchange. It was a duel where words were weapons and silence was strategy. Tucker relied on noise, volume, interruption. Jasmine relied on timing, precision, command. The contrast was undeniable, and the audience could feel the shift. The man who built a career on rattling others now found himself facing someone who refused to rattle. Every second dragged like a drumbeat. The studio air thickened, heavy with anticipation. Was Jasmine about to snap back with a long-winded defense? Would Tucker bulldoze over her as he had so many before? No one knew. But everyone could sense that the balance of power was shifting in real time. And then, as Tucker leaned in with another smirk, Jasmine opened her mouth. The room stilled. Her words came swift, precise, and devastatingly clear. Then came her 10-second reply and the air froze. It happened in a breath. The studio had tilted into chaos. Tucker's interruptions, the panels shifting, the undercurrent of tension pulling tighter and tighter, when Jasmine leaned back, folded her hands, and simply stopped. The silence was sudden, jarring. For a fraction of a second, even the cameras seemed to hesitate, unsure whether to zoom closer or pan away. Tucker smirked into that silence as if convinced he had won by default. His trademark grin, part mockery, part bait, hovered like a shield. He expected Jasmine to stumble, to fight for oxygen in the space he had seized. Instead, she inhaled slowly, exhaled even slower, and looked him dead in the eye. The pause became its own weapon. Every second stretched, and the studio audience, the crew, even the panelists felt the pull. Silence in a debate is rare, but when wielded with intent, it lands harder than words. Jasmine knew that. She had mastered it, and then she spoke. Her voice was low but charged. Every syllable cutting with clarity. Men like you mistake interruption for intelligence, but real strength? Real strength is knowing when to listen, and tonight America is listening to me, not you. 10 seconds. That was all it took. The words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. For a moment, no one breathed. It was the kind of line that doesn't just silence a room, it claims it. Her tone wasn't theatrical, not shouted or exaggerated. It was steady, deliberate, surgical. That's why it landed. The panel froze first. One man blinked twice, as if trying to process what he had just heard. Another pressed his lips together, suppressing the instinctive "oh damn" that threatened to escape. A woman on the far end leaned back, eyes widening as if she'd just witnessed a courtroom knockout. Their body language said everything the microphones couldn't. This wasn't an exchange anymore. It was a takedown. Tucker tried to hold his composure, forced a laugh, the kind he'd used countless times before to brush off opponents. But this one was different. It wobbled, brittle at the edges, more a defense mechanism than a weapon. His smirk twitched, struggling to stay plastered in place. For the first time in the segment, he looked cornered. The control he had wielded so confidently just minutes earlier had slipped through his hands, and everyone watching knew it. The cameras seemed to conspire against him. One zoomed tight on Jasmine's face, catching the calm steel in her expression. Another cut to Tucker, the smile cracking, the eyes flickering. The contrast was cinematic, the challenger in command, the veteran scrambling for footing. Looked less like a debate and more like a movie scene framed by fate itself. And then came the silence again. That's what made it brutal. Nobody rushed to speak, not the panelists, not the producers in the booth. It's not even Tucker, who for once didn't have a follow-up ready. The silence spread like shockwaves, rippling out into living rooms across America. Viewers sat straighter, phones halfway lifted, realizing they had just witnessed a moment worth replaying, because that's what it was, a rewind that moment. On Twitter, if you imagined it in real time, timelines would already be exploding. Crockett just ended Tucker in 10 seconds flat, hashtag mic drop moment rewind. Did she actually say that? Oh my God. History made on live TV. She didn't just clap back, she took the stage. On TikTok, clips would already be looping. The 10 seconds played again and again with captions like, "When you silence arrogance with truth." Memes would sprout instantly. Tucker's cracking smirk, frozen against Jasmine's stare, turned into side-by-side panels captioned "Confidence versus Composure." The moment didn't need exaggeration. It was pure, authentic, devastatingly real. Back in the studio, Tucker shuffled in his seat. His fingers tapped the desk lightly, a tell. His eyes flickered toward the camera, then back to Jasmine, as though searching for footing that no longer existed. He tried to jump in, tried to reassert control with another dismissive quip, but it was too late. The damage was done. His voice, when it returned, no longer commanded, it reacted. And everyone could tell? Jasmine, meanwhile, didn't gloat. She didn't lean forward or throw her hands in the air in victory. She simply held her ground, her expression steady, her eyes fixed forward. It was restraint that made the blow sharper. She didn't need to rub it in. The silence around her did the work. From a cinematic perspective, the scene might as well have been storyboarded. The close-up on her words, the cut to his faltering grin, the wide shot capturing the stunned panel, then the lingering still frame, the freeze that television directors crave. Where the air feels heavy and everyone watching knows they're witnessing history, it was a mic drop without the drop. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't stood from her chair. She hadn't even leaned in. And yet the impact was seismic. It was the kind of reply that would live longer than the debate itself, a line carved into the political memory, of viewers who'd replay it, quote it, carry it into conversations for weeks. In that instant, Jasmine wasn't just a congresswoman holding her own against a seasoned media powerhouse. She was the embodiment of something larger. A refusal to bow, a refusal to be drowned out, a refusal to let power define the narrative. Her words weren't just for Tucker, they were for every person who had ever been talked over, brushed aside, dismissed with a smirk, and that's why it resonated. Because when she said, "America is listening to me, not you," it wasn't arrogance. It was truth. The room had proved it. The silence had proved it. The viewers at home stunned into stillness. It proved it. The producers in the booth finally cut to a commercial. It's desperate to break the tension, to give Tucker a chance to reset, but the damage had already crystallized. When the cameras went, dark the moment remained, replaying in the minds of everyone present. This wasn't just television anymore. It was history in miniature, compressed into 10 unforgettable seconds. But the real storm was just beginning, and it was happening outside the studio. Asterisk, the cameras cut to black. But the moment did not end. It spilled out of the studio and onto the screens of millions, detonating in real time across a country wired for spectacle. 10 seconds of clarity had set the fuse, and now the explosion began. Twitter lit up first. The clip of Jasmine's reply appeared almost instantly. Grainy at first from someone recording their TV, then polished as networks posted their official snippets. Within minutes, hashtags swarmed the trending board. Hashtag Crockett vs. Carlson, hashtag mic drop moment, hashtag America listens. Every scroll revealed new reactions, some in awe, some in fury, but all acknowledging the same reality. Something significant had just happened. Did Jasmine Crockett just own Tucker Carlson on his own turf? One tweet screamed already. At 50,000 likes, another showed a looping gif of Tucker's smirk collapsing, captioned, "When arrogance meets its match." Even late-night comedians, usually slow to weigh in, dropped early jabs. One quipped, "I haven't seen silence that loud since my Wi-Fi cut out mid-Zoom." TikTok joined in next. Teenagers, activists, and even apolitical users clipped the exchange, layering it with soundtracks, dramatic violins, boxing bells, even the classic Mortal Kombat finish him. The 10-second reply became a meme format overnight. People stitched it into their own videos, teachers shutting down rude students, workers replying to overbearing bosses, parents clapping back at teenagers.
Jasmine's words transcended the
moment, they became a language of defiance. Asterisk cable news scrambled to catch up. CNN replayed the segment on a loop, with analysts marveling at Jasmine's composure. MSNBC's primetime anchors called it a seismic shift in the balance of televised debate. Even Fox, Tucker's own backyard, couldn't ignore it. Their framing was defensive. Congresswoman Crockett disrespects host in tense exchange. But the defensive tone betrayed the reality. Tucker had been shaken, and the world had noticed. Asterisk beyond the headlines, the human impact was immediate. Supporters flooded Jasmine's campaign website with donations, small dollar contributions, stacking up faster than her team could process. Volunteers signed up in droves, emailing local offices, declaring, "If she can stand up to Tucker, she can stand up for us." For many, it wasn't just a clapback, it was representation. It was watching someone refuse to be silenced in a space where too many voices had been muted. Asterisk, meanwhile, Tucker's camp scrambled. His producers circulated talking points, urging surrogates to frame Jasmine as angry or unhinged. But the effort rang hollow. The footage betrayed none of that. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't flinched. It was just been surgical. Fear died. And the more they tried to reframe it, the more obvious their desperation became. Podcasts dissected the exchange. YouTubers paused frame by frame, analyzing body language. Notice how Tucker leans back here. That's discomfort. See how Jasmine's eyes don't waver? That's power. Reaction videos racked up. Millions of views, each one amplifying the moment further. But beyond the memes and media cycles, something deeper stirred. For women of color, immigrants, progressives, long told to wait their turn, Jasmine's 10 seconds resonated like an anthem. In community centers and group chats and coffee shop conversations, people repeated her words. "America is listening to me, not you." It became a rallying cry. Not everyone celebrated, of course. Conservative circles fumed, accusing her of arrogance, of disrespecting a national icon. Tucker loyalists flooded forums, grasping for counter-narratives, out their outrage only. Added fuel to the fire, drawing more eyes to the clip. Opposition made it bigger. By the next morning, newspapers declared it the 10 seconds heard across America. Opinion columns framed it as a turning point in the media political landscape. Was the era of Tucker's dominance cracking? Was a new voice rising to challenge the old order? The framing was bold, but the energy behind it was undeniable. For Jasmine, it was more than a viral moment. It was proof of what she had always known, that dignity, wielded with precision, could topple arrogance in an instant. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to play his game. All she needed was 10 seconds of unshakable truth. And yet, as the praise poured in, as the memes multiplied, as the donations surged, Jasmine remained focused, because she understood something the rest of the world was just beginning to grasp. This wasn't the end of the battle, it was the beginning of a storm. Asterisk, in the days that followed, the clip refused to die. Networks replayed it, social feeds recycled it, classrooms and workplaces whispered about it. But beneath the noise, a quieter truth emerged, one that spoke to the heart of what those 10 seconds really meant. This was never just about Tucker Carlson versus Jasmine Crockett. It was about what happens when arrogance collides with dignity. One man had relied on bluster, interruptions, and the illusion of control. One woman had answered with clarity, composure, and the courage to stand unshaken. The contrast told a story bigger than the studio walls. It was the story of America itself, a country wrestling with voices that try to shout down truth, and those who insist on speaking it anyway. Jasmine's reply. Millions heard their own frustration, their own silenced moments, their own longing to finally be seen and respected. For immigrants who had been told they didn't belong, her words rang like a bell of affirmation. For women who had been dismissed or talked over in boardrooms and classrooms, her calm refusal to yield was a vindication. For young activists watching from their phones, it was proof that courage didn't always roar. Sometimes it simply refused to move. Tucker's smirk had cracked. His interruption had backfired. And in that reversal lay a lesson no panel show could script away. Dignity, when wielded with discipline, stronger than arrogance when it hides behind noise. Commentators called it a masterclass in restraint. Social media called it a vibe shift. But for those who felt the deeper pull, it was something more profound. It was a reminder that truth has a way of shining through, even in hostile rooms, even under bright lights, even against practiced performers. Jasmine herself didn't crow about the moment. She didn't flood her feed with victory laps. Instead, she let the replay speak for itself, because she knew the clip wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to the people who carried it, shared it, made it their own. It had become a mirror for their dignity. And that was the real triumph. Not that one politician had won a debate, but that millions felt, if only for a moment, that they too could stand unshaken in the face of dismissal. That arrogance doesn't have to be the final word. That silence can be broken. That even 10 seconds of courage can echo like thunder. Because at its core, this wasn't entertainment, it was testament. A testament to resilience, to representation, to the enduring belief that no voice, no matter how loud, has the right to drown out another's humanity. And so, as the clip etched itself into memory, the lesson settled in, arrogance crumbles, dignity rises. But for all the clarity that moment delivered, one question still hung in the air, carried by every share, every replay, every whispered retelling. If 10 seconds could shake the ground, what happens when dignity keeps speaking? Asterisk. And so it ends where it began, in a studio built for spectacle, where arrogance once strutted without challenge. Tucker Carlson interrupted, as he had done 100 times before. But this time the interruption did not dominate. This time, it backfired, because Jasmine Crockett did not blink. She did not fold. She answered with 10 seconds of unshakable truth, and the panel froze. The smirk collapsed. The silence grew heavy. And America witnessed something rare. A moment where dignity stood taller than noise. It was more than a clapback. It was a statement, a reminder that voices once ignored can no longer be silenced. A lesson that arrogance, no matter how polished, eventually fractures when confronted with authenticity. Her words echo still. America is listening to me, not you. That was not just a reply to one man. It was a declaration for millions. For every immigrant told to be quiet. For every woman spoken over. For every young activist fighting to be heard. Those 10 seconds belong to them, and now they belong to you. If you believe that truth speaks louder than privilege, share this story. If you believe dignity deserves the final word, subscribe and stand with voices who refuse to be silenced. Because this is more than a video. It is a movement of people who understand that justice is not loud but lasting. That arrogance may win airtime, but dignity wins history. Jasmine Crockett proved it in 10 seconds. Imagine what we can prove together. The nation held its breath once. It will again. And when it does, let's make sure it's our voices that rise.